Have you ever wondered what truly happens after death? What if everything you believed about heaven and hell was only half the truth? A Catholic priest died, crossed the veil, and returned with a terrifying revelation, one that will shake the very foundations of your faith. He saw something no one was ever supposed to see. Priests, holy men, trapped in the torment of hell, crying out in eternal agony. But why? What could have led them there? And most importantly, how can you make sure the same fate doesn't await you? What this priest discovered challenges everything we think we know about salvation, the afterlife, and the consequences of our choices. This is not just another story. This is a warning, a revelation that will force you to rethink the way you live your faith. Before we begin, take a moment and ask yourself, are you truly prepared for eternity? Most people watching right now aren't even subscribed to this channel. Don't make that mistake. Hit the subscribe button now so you never miss powerful truths like this that could change your life forever. Stay with me until the very end, because what you're about to hear will challenge everything you thought you knew about life, death, and what comes next. From a young age, faith was the unwavering compass that guided Ignatius Blackwood's every step. Raised in a small town where Sundays were more than rituals, they were sacred moments of communion, he embraced Catholicism as the pillar of his existence. His mother's words echoed in his heart. Faith is the light that never fades, even in the darkest days. And so, with this conviction burning within him, he embarked on a journey that would take him beyond anything he had ever imagined. At 18, he left the comfort of home and entered the seminary. The first days were filled with both excitement and trepidation. Long corridors lined with portraits of saints, the quiet reverence of candlelit prayer halls, and the rhythmic chants of devotion that became the backdrop of his days. He believed faith was absolute, unwavering. But conversations with fellow seminarians hinted at a deeper, more complex reality. Ignatius, a friend once told him, faith is solid, but it's also a path of constant questioning and growth. These words planted a seed in his mind, though at the time, he did not yet understand their full weight. At 25, he was ordained and assigned to a parish in New Orleans, a city where vibrant jazz melodies intertwined with whispers of prayers. The streets teemed with stories, tales of struggle, redemption, and quiet desperation. On one crisp autumn morning, an elderly woman, Eleanor, grasped his hands and confided, Father Ignatius, your words bring me comfort, but sometimes I feel there's more than what the church tells us. Her voice trembled, yet carried an undeniable conviction. The conversation lingered in his thoughts for weeks. Even within the sanctuary of faith, doubt had a way of creeping in, shaping the very foundation of what one believed to be true. But certainty, that unshakable pillar of his faith, was about to be tested in a way he never expected. One stormy afternoon, as he drove along the rain-slicked roads outside New Orleans, the sky darkened, heavy with impending chaos. The rhythmic drumming of rain on his windshield became an unsettling soundtrack, and then, in the blink of an eye, everything changed. A vehicle, barely visible through the torrential downpour, appeared on the wrong side of the road. The impact was brutal. A cacophony of screeching metal, shattering glass, and a desperate cry pierced the silence. His last thought before slipping into the abyss? God, why is this happening to me? Darkness swallowed everything. The weight of his own body, the sensation of breath filling his lungs, all of it faded into an eerie nothingness. But just as fear began to creep in, something extraordinary happened. Ignatius felt himself being pulled, not downward into oblivion, but upward towards something unseen yet profoundly real. It was a sensation unlike anything he had ever known, as if he was being unshackled from the limits of his physical self. As he hovered above the wreckage, the scene below played out with surreal clarity. He saw his own body, mangled, lifeless, trapped in the twisted remains of his car. Paramedics rushed to the scene, their voices frantic but distant, muffled as if they were echoes from another world. The blaring sirens, the rain-soaked pavement, the horrified expressions of bystanders, it all unfolded before him, yet he felt no pain, no fear. Instead, there was an overwhelming sense of peace, as though he had stepped into a realm where suffering held no dominion. Then, a pull, gentle but undeniable. The world he knew began to dissolve, and in its place, a tunnel of light stretched before him, a corridor of shimmering radiance that defied earthly understanding. It was neither harsh nor blinding but warm, a golden glow that beckoned him forward. As he drifted deeper into its embrace, a symphony of voices surrounded him, not chaotic, but harmonious, a melody of whispers that spoke without words. For the first time, he saw them, figures emerging from the brilliance, each presence carrying a profound familiarity. Some he recognized instantly, his grandmother, long past, her expression serene and knowing. Others were distant faces, people from his past, some he had only encountered in fleeting moments, yet somehow they knew him. One by one, they smiled, their presence filling him with a love so deep, it transcended the limitations of human emotion. "This is it," he thought. "This is the afterlife." But just as he surrendered to the peace of this ethereal passage, the light began to shift. A shadow, subtle at first, crept at the edges of his vision. The warmth of the tunnel cooled, giving way to something else, something that sent an unshakable chill through his very soul. And then he heard it, a single voice calling his name. The light flickered. What once felt like an embrace of divine warmth now trembled with an unsettling shift. The tunnel, once luminous and golden, began to dim, its brilliance consumed by an encroaching shadow. The warmth dissipated, replaced by a cold, suffocating stillness. A presence loomed ahead, not welcoming, but ominous. Ignatius felt it before he saw it. A force, heavy, relentless, pulling him downward. The serene voices faded, replaced by distant wails, agonized and raw. The tunnel of light collapsed into a narrow abyss, a chasm that seemed to stretch beyond eternity. The once familiar faces of those who had welcomed him blurred into specters of sorrow, their eyes filled not with love, but warning. Then, suddenly he fell. It was not a physical descent but a spiraling sensation, as if the very fabric of reality had been stripped away. The darkness was not just absence of light, it was alive, pulsating, a void that breathed. The air thickened, suffused with a suffocating weight that pressed against his soul. Then the voices came, no longer whispers of comfort, but cries of despair, tormented and ceaseless. As his vision adjusted, a horrifying sight unfolded before him. A vast expanse stretched endlessly, illuminated only by a dim, unnatural glow that cast jagged, flickering shadows. The landscape was not fire and brimstone, as he had once imagined hell to be. No, this was worse, an existence of endless anguish, where time had no meaning and suffering had no escape. Figures moved through the gloom, countless souls, their faces etched with eternal sorrow. Some wept, others screamed, their voices melding into a cacophony of despair. It was not a place of punishment by an angry God, but a manifestation of the choices they had made in life, their spirits shackled by their own darkness. And then he saw them. Priests. Familiar robes, now tattered and stained, clung to their gaunt forms. Their faces, some known, others unknown, were frozen in expressions of torment, their hands grasping at the air as if clawing for salvation that would never come. These were men who had stood at altars, preached of righteousness, yet now resided in the depths of despair. One figure stepped forward. Ignatius gasped. It was Reverend Caius Monroe, the mentor he had once revered, the man whose sermons had shaped his own faith. But there was no wisdom in his eyes now, only regret, endless and consuming. His voice, once commanding, now trembled with sorrow. Ignatius, we were wrong. The weight of those words crushed him. Why are you here? Ignatius stammered, his voice barely a whisper. Caius's face twisted with pain. Because we preached faith, but did not live it. We led others to God, yet our own hearts remained untouched by true humility. We sought honor, recognition, the illusion of holiness, but never surrender. And now we are bound to the very darkness we ignored. Ignatius recoiled. This was not just a vision, this was a warning. Then the darkness moved. Something was coming. The wails intensified, the ground trembled, and from the depths of the abyss, a presence stirred, a force unlike any he had ever encountered. It was neither human nor fully formed, yet its malice was suffocating. It knew him. It had been waiting. And then it spoke. Ignatius, you do not belong here. But you will. A force gripped him, pulling him deeper into the void. The shadows closed in, the voices of the priests drowned beneath the deafening roar of damnation itself. Ignatius struggled, fought, but the abyss would not let go. He was being claimed. And then, light. A single, piercing radiance tore through the darkness, severing its grip on him. The force that had bound him recoiled, shrieking in fury. Warmth returned, the suffocating weight lifted, and in an instant, he was rising. The shadows fell away, the cries of the lost souls fading into the abyss. He was not meant to stay. Not yet. As his vision blurred, one final whisper reached him, carried by the wind of that forsaken place. Remember what you saw, Ignatius, and tell them. And then, nothing. A violent gasp tore through Ignatius's chest as his lungs filled with air, like a drowning man breaking the surface of the water. His body, racked with pain, trembled as consciousness crashed over him like a tidal wave. The world around him was no longer the abyss, no longer the cries of the damned. It was light. It was sound. It was life. His eyes fluttered open, adjusting to the sterile glow above. A hospital room. The rhythmic beeping of monitors. The muffled voices of nurses. The distant hum of life continuing outside the walls that contained him. He was back. But everything had changed. For a moment, he simply lay there, staring at the ceiling, the weight of what he had seen pressing against his chest. Had it been real? The tunnel of light, the priests in torment, the voice that had called his name from the abyss. Was it all just a fevered hallucination brought on by trauma? No. He knew, he felt it in the marrow of his soul, that what he had experienced was no mere trick of the mind. It was real in a way that this world could never be. The echoes of that place still clung to him, like the scent of smoke after a raging fire. His fingers twitched, weak but alive. Slowly, painfully, he turned his head to the side. A figure sat by his bed, a nurse, eyes wide with shock, hand covering her mouth as tears welled up in her eyes. Father Ignatius, you're awake. The door burst open. More voices. More hands checking his vitals, whispering words of astonishment. 2 weeks. That's how long he had been in a coma. 2 weeks since the accident, since he had been pronounced clinically dead for 3 full minutes before being revived by paramedics. 2 weeks since he had crossed over and returned. The doctors called it a miracle. You weren't supposed to survive this, one of them admitted, shaking his head in disbelief. But survival was not the miracle. The miracle was the message, the knowledge he now carried, the revelation that burned within him like an unquenchable fire. What he had seen, what he had learned, had to be shared. But how could he begin? The days that followed were a blur of recovery, physical therapy, medications, the slow return of strength. But no matter how much his body healed, his soul remained fractured, reshaped, reforged by the truth he had witnessed. At night, sleep was fleeting. The faces of the damned haunted him. The cries of his fellow priests echoed in his mind, their sorrow seared into his memory. Caius Monroe, his mentor, his guide, reduced to a shadow of regret. The weight of their confessions bore down on him, their words a stark warning against the path he himself had once walked so blindly. Could he truly return to the pulpit and preach as he had before? Could he stand before his congregation and offer them comfort while knowing what awaited those who strayed? No, he couldn't. Not in the way he once had. Something had to change. And then, one night, as he lay awake beneath the glow of the hospital lights, he heard the voice again. Soft, clear, unmistakable. Tell them! His breath hitched. His heart pounded. He knew what had to be done. The moment he was strong enough to stand, to walk, to speak without strain, he would do it. He would tell the world what he had seen. Not to instill fear, not to preach damnation, but to reveal the truth of what lies beyond, the truth of the choices that shape our eternity, and the truth that even in the darkest abyss, there is still hope. The first time Ignatius stepped into the pulpit after his return, the silence in the church was deafening. The congregation, his people, watched him with a mixture of awe, curiosity, and apprehension. They had prayed for his recovery, whispered among themselves about the priest who had died and come back. But they did not yet know the truth. He took a breath. Then he spoke. My brothers and sisters, I have stood on the threshold of eternity. I have seen what lies beyond this world. And I am here to tell you, we are not ready. The words left his lips, heavy with meaning. Gasps filled the air. Some leaned forward, hungry for revelation. Others stiffened, their faith uneasy. But he had no room for hesitation. He had seen too much. He had felt too much. And now, his purpose was clear. For the first time, he told him everything. The tunnel of light, the peace, the welcome. But then, the shift, the descent, the darkness. He spoke of the souls lost in the abyss of priests, men like him, trapped in suffering not because God had abandoned them, but because they had abandoned the truth. They had preached righteousness, but lived in hypocrisy. They had honored tradition, but ignored compassion. Their faith had been hollow, and so their eternity had become a reflection of their hearts. He saw disbelief in the eyes of some, fear in the eyes of others. A few openly wept, their hands clutching rosaries, as if hoping to anchor themselves against the storm of his words. I do not tell you this to frighten you, he continued. I tell you this because we are being called to something greater. Faith is not about rituals alone. It is not about reputation, about appearing holy while our hearts remain distant. It is about love. It is about surrender. It is about truth. The church had never been so quiet. In the weeks that followed, word of his testimony spread beyond his parish. People traveled from miles away just to hear his story. The faithful, the skeptics, the desperate, all seeking to understand. Was it real? What does it mean? How should we live? And that's what Ignatius realized. This was his mission now. His near-death experience had not just been a glimpse of the afterlife. It had been a calling, a second chance, a divine warning. He could no longer remain within the walls of a single church. The world needed to know. He began speaking in halls, in churches across the country. He met others who had also crossed the threshold of life and death, people who had seen heaven, hell, and the spaces in between. Their stories, different yet connected, painted a picture far more complex than any single doctrine could contain. Life after death was real, but it was not as simple as many had been taught to believe. Some called him a prophet. Others called him delusional. He did not care for titles. He cared only for the truth. We have a choice, he would tell them. Every thought, every action, every moment we choose to love or to harden our hearts, it all matters. Because one day, we will stand on that threshold, and what awaits us will be a reflection of who we truly are. Some left his sermon shaken, others left changed. And for the first time in his life, Ignatius Blackwood knew this was why he had come back: to warn, to awaken, to prepare. Years passed. The name Ignatius Blackwood became synonymous with a man who had crossed the veil and returned with a message that shook the very foundations of faith. He was no longer just a priest. He was a messenger, a voice that echoed the warnings of the afterlife, a beacon for those willing to listen. His travels took him far beyond his parish. From cathedrals to humble chapels, from packed auditoriums to quiet, intimate gatherings, he spoke, he testified, he implored. Some listened with open hearts, their souls ignited by his revelations. Others resisted, dismissing him as a man lost to delusion. But Ignatius did not waver. He had seen the truth of what lies beyond death, and no amount of skepticism or scorn could erase the memories burned into his very spirit. One evening, after delivering a sermon in a remote village, a young woman approached him. Her eyes, wide with desperation, shimmered with unshed tears. "Father Blackwood, I was about to give up on faith. I thought God had abandoned me. But your words, they've changed something in me." She hesitated, gripping her rosary so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Is there still hope for someone like me?" Ignatius placed a gentle hand over hers. "There is always hope," because that was the lesson that even the depths of hell had taught him. Redemption was never beyond reach. But Ignatius had one more lesson to learn. It happened late one night, as he sat alone in his study, writing in his journal. The candle beside him flickered, the air in the room shifting as if unseen hands stirred the atmosphere. A familiar sensation crept over him, a presence, a call. And then, light. Not the searing, blinding light of his first journey, but a soft, pulsing glow, gentle as a whisper. He knew this presence. Seraphina Lumen. "You have done well, Ignatius." The voice, warm and melodic, resonated within him. He turned, and there she was, not as a mere vision, but as an undeniable reality. Her presence was peace, was wisdom, was the very essence of divine love. "But your work is not yet complete." His breath caught. Hadn't he fulfilled his mission? Hadn't he shared the truth? "There is one more thing you must understand," she continued, her luminous form shifting, revealing something beyond the physical realm. And suddenly, Ignatius was there again. Not in the hospital, not in his study, but back at the threshold of eternity. This time, he saw beyond what he had before, beyond the suffering, beyond the torment, because not all who had fallen into darkness were lost forever. He saw souls rising, lifted by unseen hands, pulled from the abyss by prayers, by love, by acts of grace. And then he saw Caius Monroe. The priest who had once been bound in sorrow now stood at the edge of the darkness, reaching toward the light. His eyes, once filled with torment, now held something else, hope. "You were right, Ignatius," his voice echoed, raw but alive. "The journey does not end in despair. Love is the key." And then Ignatius understood. Hell was not eternal for those who chose to reach for the light. Even in the depths of despair, redemption was still possible. And as he was pulled back to the physical world, his heart, for the first time in years, felt lighter. He had feared that his message was one of judgment, but now he knew it was a message of love. Ignatius Blackwood continued to share his story, not as a warning of eternal doom, but as a promise of eternal hope. Faith was not about avoiding hell, it was about embracing love. His final years were spent in quiet devotion, guiding those who sought truth, comforting those who feared death, and reminding all who would listen that their choices mattered. And then, one evening, as he lay in bed, The candle beside him flickered one last time. He closed his eyes and smiled, because this time, when the light came for him, he knew exactly where it would lead. What do you think about this shocking testimony? Do you believe that even priests can end up in hell, or do you think there's another explanation? Share your thoughts in the comments. I want to know what you think. And if this video made you reflect on your own faith, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next revelations that could change your spiritual journey forever. Now, if you want to dive even deeper into the mysteries of the afterlife, watch the next video on your screen right now. I'm Additioner Gnome Du Locutor, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay blessed.